In the East Room of the White House, Donald Trump shot to his feet and roared at Jasmine Crockett. "Get out!" Gasps erupted as cameras zoomed in. Jasmine didn't flinch, her voice cut like steel. "Mr. President, this room does not belong to one man. It belongs to the people." Then she raised a red-stamped folder, exposing proof of millions spent for personal gain. One shout, one reply, one document, and the East Room shook. Was this the moment Trump's presidency collapsed on live record? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The chandeliers inside the East Room of the White House didn't just glow, they burned. The name of the night: Night of Accountability. On paper, it was supposed to be a calm event, celebrating transparency, responsibility, and national unity. But no one believed that. The air was too sharp, the silence too loaded. Every senator, governor, ambassador, journalist, and student in the room could feel it. This wasn't about unity. This was about control, power, and who was about to lose it. At the front table sat President Donald Trump, arms stiff, shoulders locked. His fingers tapped the surface like a ticking clock. He wasn't speaking yet, but his body was already yelling. His face was tense, eyes darting, lips curled into something between a smirk and a snarl. He wasn't just impatient, he was on edge. Every movement told the same story. He wanted this night over before it began. Then came the shift. Jasmine Crockett walked in. She wasn't loud. She didn't wave. She didn't smile for the cameras. But the room turned anyway. She wore a sharp black suit, heels clicking with purpose. Her expression was calm, focused. No theatrics, just presence. And somehow that unsettled the room more than any entrance ever could. People whispered, "Is that her? She really came." She didn't flinch. She didn't pause. She walked straight toward her seat like she belonged there. And she did. Some watched with doubt, some with admiration. But no one looked away. Jasmine Crockett wasn't the biggest name in the room, but at that moment, she was the one everyone was watching. She sat, straight back, eyes forward, calm. But it wasn't passive calm, it was defiant. Her silence felt louder than applause. Across the room, Trump stared at her. He didn't blink. She didn't either. That was the moment everything shifted. That was when people realized this night wouldn't end with polite speeches and soft applause. This was the start of a showdown, and it had already begun. And just like that, the room exhaled, but no one truly relaxed. Wine glasses clinked gently, laughter rolled in low waves, and the buzz of polite conversation filled the air, like background static. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved through the crowd with trays of sparkling drinks and tiny plates, weaving between power brokers and Ivy League interns. On the surface, it looked like every other high-profile DC dinner: smiles, nods, scripted toasts. But behind the smiles, jaws were tight. People talked, but they were listening for something else. Something beneath the silverware and speeches. The cameras never stopped. Dozens of reporters lined the room like snipers with lenses. Red lights blinked. Microphones caught every whisper. They weren't here for the wine. They were here for the fracture. One spark, one line, one misstep. They could feel it coming, like thunder building before the lightning hits. Everyone was watching, waiting, especially for her. A few eyes turned, subtle but sharp, landing on Jasmine Crockett. A senator muttered, "What's she gonna do?" "That's Trump." A diplomat from Europe shook his head slightly, as if doubting she'd even speak. Others exchanged skeptical glances, questioning not her presence, but her power. She was young, she was new, and she was sitting directly in the blast zone. The tension in the room was real, palpable, like a violin string pulled so tight it could snap from a whisper. Every laugh was forced. Every toast felt fake. The stage was set. The players were in place. And deep down, everyone knew. This wasn't just a dinner. This was a countdown. And then, right on cue, her name was called. And the temperature in the room dropped. Jasmine Crockett stood up. Not slowly, not dramatically, just deliberately. Her chair made a clean scrape against the marble, loud enough to slice through the room's tension like a knife. The silence was instant. All chatter died. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Dozens of heads turned toward her, some wide-eyed, some smirking, others tightening their jaws as if bracing for impact. This wasn't just a woman rising to speak. This was a line being drawn, and everyone in the room felt it. She adjusted the mic with a calm hand, her nails clicking once against the base. She didn't clear her throat. She didn't smile. Her eyes scanned forward, not seeking applause, not even seeking approval, just daring the moment to blink first. Her voice rang out, clear, sharp, unapologetically steady. "My name is Jasmine Crockett." It wasn't an introduction. It was a declaration. "And tonight, I'm not here to flatter power. I'm here to speak to something bigger than any one of us. Democracy." A few guests exhaled softly, barely audible, but enough to register. The tension wasn't building. It was already there. Jasmine just lit the fuse. "We are not here to protect egos. We are here to protect the country." The sentence slammed down like a gavel. Eyes darted, some toward Trump, others to the cameras. Then quickly back to Jasmine, who hadn't moved a muscle. Her body was still, but her presence was loud. Every syllable landed with the precision of a fighter throwing body shots, measured, controlled, and designed to wear down resistance. She paused, but not to collect herself. She paused like a surgeon before the final cut. And then, with absolute clarity, she spoke again. "Our institutions don't survive because we yell the loudest. They survive because someone in the room, has the courage to listen." The room felt like it had stopped breathing. Eyes widened, backs straightened. Journalists gripped their pens tighter. There was no question who that someone wasn't, and no doubt who she meant. Then came the final strike, slower, sharper, and colder than anything before. "History doesn't measure volume. It measures courage." She didn't rush it. She let the words hang, heavy and still. Not a punchline, not a soundbite, a judgment, a warning, a mirror. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was electrified. Dozens of heads turned, this time openly, toward Trump. No effort to hide it. The weight of her words had pulled every gaze in the room toward him like gravity. He didn't move at first. Then came the signs. His hands curled tight on the table's edge. His knuckles paled. His face turned crimson, not from embarrassment, but from something deeper, raw, fury held under pressure. His jaw clenched so hard it shifted his whole posture. The tapping, his signature drum of control, had stopped. He didn't speak, but his whole body did. His glare locked on Jasmine, who still hadn't looked his way. She didn't need to. The moment didn't belong to him anymore. Every ounce of energy in that room had shifted, from a man trying to dominate the table to a woman standing alone and not flinching. Her words didn't need volume. They carried weight. And Trump, for the first time that night, looked like he felt it. And just when the silence became unbearable, he snapped. Trump rose so fast his chair slammed backward, its legs dragging harshly across the marble like metal against bone. The sound shrieked through the room, a violent tear in the fabric of decorum. Gasps broke out before anyone could catch them. Forks clattered against plates. Every spine straightened at once, as if some unseen alarm had just gone off. A few people instinctively held their breath. Others froze mid-motion, their eyes locked on the man now standing like a storm about to break loose. His right arm lunged forward, rigid and shaking, fingers stretched toward Jasmine like a loaded weapon. His face, already flushed, turned a deeper shade of fury, redder than power, redder than fear. And then came the words, loud and raw, cut straight from the gut. "Get out!" Not whispered, not muttered, not calculated. He screamed it. He hurled it. The phrase ricocheted off the high ceilings, crashing into chandeliers, bouncing down velvet curtains. There was no ambiguity, no tact. It was rage, unfiltered and unmasked. The reaction was instant and paralyzing. The entire East Room fell under a spell of disbelief. You could almost hear hearts skip a beat. Some guests sat stiff, blinking in shock. Others slowly turned their heads toward Jasmine, as if unsure whether they truly heard what they just heard. The orchestra of civil ceremony had been shattered by a single deafening outburst, and now only the echo of it remained. Cameras snapped like gunfire. Lenses zoomed. Red recording lights blinked to life as reporters lifted their arms without even thinking, pressing record in perfect reflex. A dozen journalists leaned forward in unison. The moment wasn't just being captured, it was being swallowed, framed, immortalized. Phones were raised discreetly, notes scribbled in a frenzy. In every corner of the room, a single truth took hold. History was now being written in real time. And in the middle of that storm, Jasmine Crockett didn't budge. She stood exactly where she had before, spine straight, feet grounded, hands still resting at her sides. Her eyes didn't flinch, didn't dart, didn't fall. They stayed level, sharp, unwavering. If Trump had expected her to recoil, to fluster, to drop her gaze, he had miscalculated badly. Her silence wasn't submission, it was defiance, pure and concentrated. There was no need to raise her voice. Her stillness said everything. In that instant, with cameras rolling and power erupting across from her, Jasmine didn't retreat. She didn't fight back. She simply held her space, and in doing so, flipped the balance of power without speaking a single word. The scream had come and gone, but what lingered was her refusal to be moved. But before the silence could crush the room, Jasmine finally spoke. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't break her gaze. She simply stood there, shoulders back, head high, and let the moment land in her hands like it belonged to her. And then, with a voice calm but razor sharp, she answered him. Mr. President, with all due respect, this room doesn't belong to one person, it belongs to the American people. The sentence didn't just respond, it redefined the power in the room. Every word fell with the weight of something bigger than her, heavier than him. She wasn't speaking for herself. She was speaking for everyone who never got to stand where she was standing now. There was no applause at first, just stillness. Eyes blinked, throats tightened. Even the cameras, now blinking red across the room, seemed to pause in shock. Then came one clap, from the left side, hesitant but sharp, then another, then 5, then 15. The sound grew, uneven but real, like the crowd didn't mean to applaud, but couldn't stop themselves. A ripple turned into a wave. No one had expected it, least of all Trump. He stiffened instantly. His hands, which had been locked on the edge of the table, curled tighter, veins pushing against his skin. His jaw moved once, clenched, then set. Then, like a kettle snapping under pressure, he burst. "You're just here to humiliate me." The shout came out raw, unfiltered, as if it bypassed thought and came straight from instinct. But it didn't sound strong. It sounded shaken, the kind of yell someone throws when they feel the ground shifting under their feet. The applause faltered, not out of fear, but out of gravity. The energy had changed again. Now the room wasn't just surprised, it was holding its breath. No one moved, no one dared. Some turned to each other, eyebrows raised, unsure what had just cracked louder, his voice or his authority. A reporter near the aisle leaned forward, barely breathing, gripping their notepad like it might fly away. The tension was no longer theoretical. It was thick enough to touch. This wasn't just a heated moment, it was a rupture. And Jasmine, still standing tall in the center of it, hadn't moved an inch. Not from her spot, not from her truth, not from the fire that was now fully, undeniably lit. But Trump, cornered, humiliated, and unraveling, refused to back down. And when a wounded ego swings, it swings wild. He rose so fast the chair screeched behind him, scraping hard against the stone floor like metal tearing open a wound. His face was flushed with fury, jaw clenched, eyes wide with something between desperation and wrath. He jabbed a finger into the air, voice thundering across the chamber like a man possessed. "This is my presidency. This is my house." The echo of his words clanged against the marble, but the power in them felt brittle, like glass held too tight in a trembling fist. He wasn't commanding the room anymore. He was begging it to remember something it no longer believed. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't smirk, didn't blink, didn't even lean back. She simply stood there, rooted like a monument built for storms. Then, without raising her voice, she delivered a line so sharp it cut through the noise like a blade. "This presidency doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the people." Her words didn't rise, but they rose inside the room. A low murmur began, then hands started clapping in pockets. First on the left, then the center, then the back row. It wasn't choreographed, it wasn't polite, it was an eruption, a release, a defiance. Applause rolled like thunder, but not uniform thunder. Staggered, human, volatile. Staffers looked at each other in disbelief. A Capitol historian whispered, "I've never seen anything like this." Reporters scrambled to aim their cameras, realizing history wasn't creeping. It had just kicked down the door. "Let her speak! Let her finish!" Voices rose above the clapping, not in chaos but clarity. Not everyone applauded, but those who did weren't hiding. They were standing taller. Trump's hands clenched into fists. His voice cracked from the strain, no longer booming, but barking. "Security! Get her out!" He shouted like a man used to being obeyed, used to the room bending. But tonight, the room didn't bend. The room had shifted. The Secret Service stood like statues, trained, silent, unmoved. They exchanged controlled glances, but not one reached for a radio, not one stepped forward. Their hands stayed by their sides. Because they weren't just guarding a former president, they were guarding protocol, optics, the Constitution. Removing a sitting congresswoman, on camera, mid-hearing, in front of witnesses and the press, would trigger an earthquake Washington wasn't ready to survive. Everyone felt it. The fracture, the moment. Trump had pulled the fire alarm, but no one was willing to follow him into the flames. Not anymore. But Jasmine wasn't finished, not even close. What came next would turn the entire chamber upside down. She stepped forward slowly, every movement precise, like a fuse being lit, inch by inch. Her eyes didn't leave Trump's face, and her hand moved to the side pocket of her case. The leather creaked as she unlatched the flap, the sound slicing through the charged silence like a trigger being cocked. And then, in one fluid motion, she pulled out a thick folder, stamped in red, marked with the unmistakable crest of the Executive Office of the President. The seal gleamed under the dome lights. Every camera zoomed in. Every breath in the room seemed to stop. Jasmine raised it just above shoulder level, turning slightly to make sure the press pool, the House members, the staffers, and, more importantly, the American public watching live could see it clearly. Then she spoke, slowly and clearly, with a voice that didn't waver. "If you think I came here just to talk," she said, her gaze locked on Trump, "you're wrong. I came with evidence." Gas scattered like sparks across the chamber. Members of Congress leaned forward in their seats. Journalists scrambled to unmute recorders, adjust tripods, reposition boom mics. Trump squinted, his lips curling downward, but he didn't interrupt. Not yet. Jasmine opened the folder with both hands, unfolding a tri-fold binder filled with printed financial records. She selected one sheet and held it up to the nearest camera. The paper was crisp, high resolution, and deadly. "These," she began, her voice steady but unmistakably sharp, "are internal White House financial contracts." She tilted the page for the committee chair to see, then angled it toward the central monitor that displayed documents during live hearings. Within seconds, the enlarged scan filled the screen. White House Internal Disbursement Authorization. Fiscal year 2020. There, printed clearly in black ink, was the authorization line. A discretionary expenditure of $4,900,000 allocated for event hospitality, private travel, family-designated entertainment use, Mar-a-Lago. Explicitly authorized by Donald J. Trump on January 14, 2020. The font was standard, the layout typical, but what screamed across the page wasn't the format, it was the signature. In unmistakable bold Sharpie strokes at the bottom of the page was one name, Donald J. Trump. A jolt ran through the room, the kind of silence that only comes after a thunderclap. Jasmine gave them a second to read it, absorb it. Then she continued. "Signed by you," she said, pointing to the signature with a click of her pen. "Authorizing nearly $5 million in taxpayer funds, not for public defense, not for infrastructure, not for national health, but for hospitality expenses at Mar-a-Lago, including private jet travel and entertainment classified as family exclusive." Reporters' fingers went wild across keyboards. The clicking sounded like a swarm of locusts. A CBS producer gasped audibly. One congressman on the right side of the dais mouthed, "Jesus Christ." Another covered her mouth, stunned. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words hit like steel. "You can scream. You can kick me out. But these numbers don't lie." It felt like something in the air broke. Shouts erupted from the back of the gallery. The chant started faint. "Let her speak! Let her speak!" But grew louder with every second. Members of the audience stood. The chant rolled forward like a wave. "Let her speak! Let her speak!" Even a few aides on the sidelines and sworn to silence couldn't help but murmur in disbelief. Flashbulbs exploded. C-SPAN's ticker updated in real time. Crockett reveals $5 million White House spending for private luxury. Signed by Trump. Twitter feeds began to melt. And then, like a balloon popping with no warning, Trump exploded. He jumped from his chair, knocking over a glass of water in the process. His face flushed red so fast it looked like someone had hit a switch. He slammed both palms on the table and bellowed, "Fake! Fabricated!" But the words rang hollow. His voice cracked halfway through, "Fabricated." His hand, still hovering over the documents, trembled. The fire in his eyes wasn't fury anymore. It was panic, cold, rattling, desperate. He pointed at Jasmine, but his finger wavered midair. He opened his mouth again, searching for something, anything, to throw back. But nothing came, only silence. Cameras zoomed in on his eyes. They were darting, left, right, back to the screen, then to the seal on the folder in Jasmine's hands. Not focused, not confident, not powerful. He looked cornered. The chairman tried to regain control. "Order! Order in the chamber!" he called out. But it was too late. The room had slipped into a different current now, one Jasmine was steering. She remained still, eyes locked on Trump, holding the document like a verdict. Behind her, 2 more pages were ready, and everyone could sense it. This was just the beginning. But in this moment, as chants rose and cameras rolled, Trump didn't just lose control, he lost the floor, and Jasmine owned it. The ink on that document hadn't even dried in people's minds yet. Yet what followed wasn't silence. It was combustion. It started with a single chair scraping back, a high-pitched sound that cut through the thick tension like a blade. A student, young, hoodie unzipped over a t-shirt that read, "Policy for People," stood up fast, eyes wide, fists clenched. His voice trembled at first but found its footing mid-sentence. "We stand with Jasmine!" It wasn't a chant, not yet. It was a spark. And sparks travel. The second student rose even faster, like gravity had reversed. Then came a third, then 5, then rose. Within seconds, the entire student section of the gallery had erupted into standing applause. Not polite, not procedural. This wasn't decorum, it was eruption. These weren't followers. They were witnesses, and they had seen enough. Hands crashed together, echoing off marble. The clapping wasn't just loud. It was alive. It had rhythm, momentum, and fury. It was fueled by something deeper than admiration. It was justice rediscovering its voice in a room that had long forgotten it. The gallery's energy surged across the room like a sonic boom. Staffers glanced up from their notes. Aides froze in place. One senator turned slowly in his chair, eyes darting like he wasn't sure whether to run or stay. The sound grew. Not in volume alone, but in meaning. Every clap carried a message. We see her, we believe her, and we are done with him. Then it happened again, this time from the main floor. An older woman in a blue pantsuit, an educator from Florida, recognized by several in the room, stood and began applauding, lips pressed into a determined line. She didn't shout. She just clapped over and over, as if it were the only act left to make sense of what was happening. A ripple spread around her. One by one, heads of nonprofits, law scholars, budget analysts, people who had once served under past administrations, stood and joined her. Their palms pounded louder than Trump's entire defense. Meanwhile, on the far right side of the chamber, the usual suspects, the Trump allies, the defenders, the loyalists, sat still as statues. Faces drained of expression, their hands stayed flat on the table. No clapping, no speaking, no rebuttals. Their silence wasn't strategy, it was fear. Fear of being caught standing up for the wrong man at the wrong time, with every camera in America rolling. Then came the sound no one expected. Fake news, Trump shouted it, desperate, trying to seize the air that was slipping through his hands. But it was already too late. The phrase landed like a stone tossed into a tidal wave. It didn't stop the applause. It drowned in it. People didn't even pause to react. They just kept clapping, louder now, stronger, as if rejecting his words was the point. Fake news, he barked again, this time louder, red-faced, spittle flying. But it hit nothing. Not a single head turned. Not a single reporter even jotted it down. His weaponized phrase, once a battle cry for his base, had just been disarmed in real time, gutted by reality and buried by truth. Sweat beaded under his hairline. His makeup, too thick for the lights, began to cake around his jawline. He pulled out his collar, adjusted his tie. But the image only worsened. This wasn't the Trump America remembered from rallies. This was a man unraveling, live on federal record, with no handler in sight. Across from him, Jasmine didn't move. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She just stood with the document still in hand, the one that bore his signature, his authorization, his date. She didn't raise her voice. She had no need. The nation had already heard her loud and clear. Truth, when delivered plainly, doesn't need amplification. It echoes all on its own. And that's when the cameras moved. A slow pan cut from the back row to the front. Then another camera locked onto Trump's face. His jaw was clenched, but not in defiance. More like defeat. His pupils darted from side to side, looking for an exit, a lifeline, a line of defense. None came. Not even from the ones he thought he controlled. Then came the split screen, the kind newsrooms live for. On the left, Donald Trump, red-faced, sweating, lips parted in a failed comeback, tie slightly off-center, his hands gripping the edge of the desk like it was the only solid thing left beneath him. On the right, Jasmine Crockett, calm, upright, shoulders square, no paper in front of her except the one page that mattered. Her eyes weren't arrogant. They were anchored. They weren't triumphant. They were steady, and they were watching him unravel. The contrast wasn't just visual. It was moral. It was generational. It was cultural. It was everything this moment had been building toward. Trump had entered that room expecting a show, a spectacle, a battle he could win with insults and dominance. What he got instead was something he couldn't shout over: accountability. And accountability doesn't yell. It stares you down in front of millions and lets you sweat. Cameras zoomed in. Jasmine didn't blink. Trump blinked 3 times in 12 seconds. Somewhere behind him, a staffer shifted nervously in their chair. Another adjusted the mic, as if trying to signal the chaos had a mute button. But there was no muting this. Not anymore. The genie was out. The chamber had chosen its side. Still, the applause grew. It was no longer spontaneous. It was historic. Not for its noise, but for what it silenced. The hearing may have ended, but what Jasmine unleashed couldn't be contained by walls or time. By the time the sun dipped behind the Capitol dome, the clip was everywhere. No headline could quite keep up with it. No talking head could spin it fast enough. Jasmine Crockett, folder raised, eyes locked forward like she'd practiced that moment her whole life. The room frozen, Trump silent. And that sentence, "Numbers don't lie," it hit like a punch to the chest, a truth too sharp to be ignored. In the first hour, political junkies grabbed it. By the second, cable news couldn't look away. By the fourth, it had jumped into something bigger, an emotional contagion. There were no fancy edits, no cinematic filters. Just the raw moment. A black congresswoman standing tall, confronting power with proof. It reminded people of what politics was supposed to be before it got drowned in noise. It was quiet, and it was seismic. By midnight, "Numbers don't lie" was etched into digital history. It was printed in bold black letters across T-shirts, screen printed on coffee mugs, plastered on billboards in 3 cities. Twitter flooded with slowed-down gifs of Jasmine lifting the folder, her arm calm but unshakable, her mouth just barely forming the words that would go viral. On Reddit, a post titled "The 14-second file that broke Trump" topped every thread. TikTok was a blur of duets, lip syncs, even classroom reenactments. But the original clip, it stayed untouched, raw, sacred. In one viral edit, the audio cut everything but her voice. Numbers don't lie. Then silence. Then the sound of a nation collectively exhaling. That version hit 7 million views before the morning commute. And unlike the usual online storm, this wasn't satire or hate bait. This was reverence. Jasmine Crockett had done something no one saw coming. She'd made the truth trend. By dawn, the ripple had hit the real world. In a cafe in Atlanta, the barista wore a black hoodie with white block letters across the chest. Numbers don't lie. Customers pointed at the screen mounted above the counter, CNN looping the clip on mute. One man whispered, "She didn't just speak, she proved." A woman nearby nodded slowly. "That's what it looks like when someone fights for us." And with that, Jasmine's name crossed the line from politician to symbol. In Houston, a classroom projector played the clip for a 10th grade government class. The teacher paused at the exact second Trump's jaw tightened and asked, "What just happened here?" A student in the back, quiet all semester, raised her hand. He knew he lost. She didn't scream. She just showed him. The room stayed quiet for a beat. Then every student wrote that quote down like it was a lesson that couldn't be tested but had to be remembered. Even in places where Jasmine once faced sharp opposition, the tone began to shift. A conservative talk radio host, normally quick with insults, paused mid-show and said, "Look, I still don't agree with her, but that woman didn't flinch. I respect that." Online, former critics, some brutal, some subtle, started to walk it back. "I didn't like her attitude," one Facebook user wrote, "but damn, she had her facts straight, and she made him sweat." In churches across the South, the phrase made its way into Sunday sermons. One pastor, gripping his worn leather Bible, raised it like Jasmine raised her file and said, "The truth doesn't need to yell. The truth just needs to stand still." And people clapped, not for a party, not for a vote, for the feeling they'd been starved of, someone finally saying what needed to be said and backing it up with numbers that didn't stutter. At a town hall in Ohio, a local grandmother, who had never liked Jasmine's politics, shook her head and muttered, "I wouldn't have said it like she did." "But Lord, I'm glad somebody said it," her nephew chimed in. "She made him sweat through that $1,000 suit." They both laughed, but it wasn't mocking. It was admiration masked in surprise, the kind that only comes when someone forces you to see them differently. At gas stations, convenience stores, libraries, bus stops, people were talking, not just about Trump, not even just about Jasmine. They were talking about what it felt like to see someone walk into a room full of power, not bow to it, and leave it rattled. One headline read, "Jasmine Crockett did what others feared, and she did it without raising her voice." Another, "The folder heard round the world." In LA, a mural appeared overnight, Jasmine mid-step, folder in hand, walking calmly as shadows of political giants fell behind her. It wasn't commissioned. It wasn't announced. It was just there, like a declaration. Spray-painted in neon yellow next to her head were 3 words, "Numbers don't lie." Beneath that, a smaller phrase, "Truth walks, fear runs." Some tried to dismiss it. Fox commentators rolled their eyes. A few right-wing influencers called it overhyped theater. But even their audiences seemed unsure. The comments flooded with clips, stats, moments of Jasmine holding her ground. "Watch the tape," one wrote, "then talk." For every insult thrown her way, 10 more voices rose to meet it, not with screaming, but with receipts. People who had never followed hearings were now quoting time-stamped footage. They weren't just retweeting, they were studying, sharing links, digging into what came before the moment. Jasmine had cracked something open, and the public didn't just cheer, they learned. The folder was no longer just paper. It was a weapon, a shield, a message. And through it all, Jasmine said nothing. No interviews, no victory lap, no tweets. She let the footage speak, and America, divided, skeptical, exhausted, listened. But the silence from Jasmine only made the noise around her louder. And inside the White House, it was starting to feel like a 5-alarm fire. The clip was only 14 seconds long, But those seconds exploded across every platform like a precision-guided missile. Jasmine's calm voice, the slow lift of the black folder, and the camera catching Trump's expression the moment the numbers hit the microphone, it was surgical. No shouting, no theatrics. Just the phrase that echoed like a gunshot. Numbers don't lie. White House aides were caught off guard. Within the hour, frantic phone calls rattled across 3 departments. We need a denial, now. Call Fox, get Hannity on board. Tell legal to prepare a statement. But the fire had already jumped the fence. The footage was circulating at breakneck speed, dissected in real time on live streams, stitched into TikToks, broken into stills for memes. One frame of Trump blinking slowly while Jasmine stared him down was now captioned, "When receipts speak louder than rage." Behind the scenes, Trump was in full meltdown. He threw his briefing binder off the table, pages scattering like feathers in a storm. "I want that video taken down, all of it, every damn copy," he barked. But no one had the heart, or the legal grounds, to tell him that wasn't how the internet worked anymore. Every second he raged, more versions popped up, auto-tuned, subtitled in 20 languages, even projected onto the side of a building in Portland. That evening, the official White House press office released a terse, hastily written statement. The video circulating online has been manipulated for political effect and should not be regarded as a factual representation of President Trump's record or statements. The backlash was immediate. Reporters hammered them with questions. Manipulated how? Which facts are in dispute? Can you specify what's false? But the press secretary stammered, flailed, then deflected. "We are reviewing the video content for digital tampering." The room erupted in laughter, because everyone had seen the unedited C-SPAN feed. There was no tampering. There were no cuts. There was just reality, and it had gone viral. Trump's usual tools, mockery, denial, deflection, weren't working. He logged on to Truth Social, typing in all caps at 1:13 a.m. "Total fake hearing. Crockett is a fraud." But the comments underneath told a different story. Why so defensive? She didn't lie. She showed math. Man got cooked by a spreadsheet, and the one that hurt the most repeated thousands of times. Numbers don't lie. That phrase became a cultural earthquake. The next morning, it was on T-shirts, billboards, church signs. One cafe in Atlanta even renamed its espresso special the Crockett Roast. Talk radio blew up. Hosts who'd never said Jasmine's name were now saying it with a hint of caution. "Look, I may not agree with her politics," one said, "but she didn't even blink. And that folder ended careers." The GOP war room panicked. A counter-narrative was launched. Claimed the folder was fabricated, that the document was pulled from non-authoritative sources, but they had nothing solid, no chain of custody to dispute, no internal memo to contradict it. Because the worst part was, it was real. The timestamp, the signature, the $4.9 million line under family-designated entertainment use. Mar-a-Lago. It was all there in black and white, with Donald J. Trump authorized at the bottom. And Jasmine? She said nothing. No press conference, no victory lap. She just walked out of that chamber like nothing happened. That silence? It terrified them, because Trump was spiraling in public, and she wasn't even in the room anymore. Every attempt at pushback only deepened the wound. When one Fox analyst tried to downplay it, "This is just political showmanship," the anchor interrupted. "Then why is the White House trying to discredit the video?" There was no answer. And Trump's defenders, once so eager to leap to his defense, were suddenly less enthusiastic. "I didn't see the full clip," they said. "I'll wait for more context." But there was no more context. The full context was the problem. Inside Trump's circle, the mood shifted from rage to paranoia. She had help. Someone fed her that folder. Who leaked the authorization form? Was it from inside Mar-a-Lago? They tore through comms logs, flight manifests, even intern access lists. But the truth haunted them. It didn't matter who gave Jasmine the file. What mattered was that she used it like a scalpel. Clean, sharp, undeniable. And the world didn't just watch. It believed her. Foreign news outlets picked it up. France 24 called it a quiet reckoning on Capitol Hill. The BBC ran it under the headline, "The Day Facts Fought Back." In South Korea, it trended under the hashtag Black Folder Moment. Even China's state media aired it with a rare tone of admiration. One woman, one document, total collapse. And yet Trump couldn't let go. He tweeted again the next night, "Weak people believe numbers. Strong people make history." The internet went wild. One user replied, "Strong people also go to jail for tax fraud." Another wrote, "She didn't try to make history. She showed it." But the worst blow came from within. A former campaign advisor, off the record, told CNN, "This is the first time I've ever seen him actually scared. Not mad, not pissed, just exposed." And still, Jasmine said nothing. She didn't need to, because the line had already been crossed, and the folder had done its job. It didn't just hold paper, it held accountability. And now every time Trump tried to fight back, he wasn't attacking an opponent. He was defending a wound broadcast to millions, a wound named and dated and authorized in his own signature. The man who once rewrote headlines with a tweet was now chasing them, breathless and behind. And the words he couldn't outrun, no matter how many podiums he stood behind, were the same ones now printed across the country, worn like armor by a nation that finally saw through the fog. Numbers don't lie. But Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She didn't even blink. As the final echo of her words, "Numbers don't lie," hung in the air like smoke after an explosion, the entire chamber stood suspended in a silence that felt unnatural. Not quiet, not respectful. Frozen. Papers remained untouched. Chairs didn't creak. Even the clicking of camera shutters slowed, as if the world realized it was standing on the edge of something irreversible. Jasmine sat still, hands relaxed on the desk, her expression unreadable but steady. She wasn't waiting for applause. She wasn't baiting a reaction. She was letting the moment breathe. She didn't look at Trump. She didn't have to. His silence had already told the story, his furious eyes darting, lips twitching, jaw clenched like a vice about to snap. But the room wasn't watching him anymore. They were watching her, not just as a witness, not even as an opponent, but as a force. Something had shifted, and that shift wasn't loud. It was still. Aides whispered behind folders. Security personnel, normally stone-faced, glanced at each other. Congressional staffers froze mid-sentence in the hallway monitors. And at the far corner, a senior Republican aide leaned to a reporter and whispered, "What the hell just happened?" In that charged vacuum, Jasmine chose silence. She could have launched into a triumphant lecture, seized the momentum, listed every unethical deal buried in that ledger. But she didn't. Her restraint wasn't fear. It was mastery. "Let the truth finish what I started," she'd later tell a staffer, off the record. She knew the power of a quiet moment, that some truths scream louder when left untouched. And on that day, inside a building soaked in centuries of rhetoric, she let the silence do what no speech could: hang Trump with his own weight. Television networks scrambled. The clip of Jasmine closing the folder, slow, deliberate, like sealing a coffin, went viral before the chairman even called a recess. One frame, one line. And the rest? Just stillness. CNN's evening segment led with, "She didn't drop the mic. She dropped everything." MSNBC ran the moment 6 times in an hour, not edited, not interrupted, just played in full, because there was no need to commentate. The story was self-evident. "She didn't twist the knife," said one panelist. "She handed him the blade and walked away." Fox News for once was confused. Their headlines danced around the moment, trying to reframe it as emotional manipulation or orchestrated drama. But even their hosts couldn't look away, because the clip wasn't about narrative. It was about reality, no spin, just raw, undeniable confrontation, and a woman who didn't flinch. And then, like a wave, the analysts, historians, and cultural commentators joined in. "This is the moment that will define Jasmine Crockett's career," wrote one Atlantic contributor. "In 38 seconds, she redefined what congressional courage looks like," tweeted a Yale law professor. "That wasn't just a political checkmate," declared NPR. "It was a recalibration of power." But it wasn't just political. It was human. Jasmine didn't rise, she didn't smile. She didn't look around for validation. She simply sat, shoulders square, breath steady, eyes forward, like a woman who had seen too much, lost too much, fought too long to waste this moment on pride. It was the kind of silence that only survivors learn, the kind forged in courtrooms and protests, in back rooms where power plays out in winks and lies. And now, it had found its place center stage. A moment later, the chairman cleared his throat. No one moved. Even he seemed afraid to interrupt whatever spell had settled over the room. Finally, with a tight jaw and a forced nod, he announced, "We'll break for recess." His voice cracked. The gavel fell. Still, Jasmine didn't rise. Trump pushed his chair back too fast, the metal legs screeching like a tantrum. He muttered something to his lawyer, but it didn't matter, because nobody was watching him anymore. Cameras followed Jasmine as she finally stood, slowly, gracefully, gathered the ledger and the folder, and walked out of frame like the final shot of a film that didn't need a sequel. No dramatic music, no fist pump, just presence. The country felt it. They weren't watching a congresswoman. They were witnessing a shift in history, and it wasn't long before the headlines named it the defining career moment of Jasmine Crockett. Not a powerful statement, not a bold exchange, not a viral clip, the defining moment. Something had been carved into the granite of American memory, not with noise, but with poise. On Twitter, the phrase trended within 30 minutes. Hashtags like numbers, don't lie, and defining moment flooded feeds. Even those who had never watched a hearing before stopped scrolling to watch that 46-second silence. Millions rewatched it, slowed it down, analyzed her breath, her expression, her body language. Because in that silence, people saw something they didn't know they craved. Dignity, strength, control, truth. And Jasmine? She said nothing more that day. She didn't do interviews, didn't post a reaction, didn't release a statement, because she knew something Washington forgot long ago. When the truth is clear, you don't need to scream it. You just let the world catch up. And when the dust finally settled, what remained wasn't the silence. It was the message. Jasmine Crockett's decision to say nothing after unleashing the truth was more than restraint. It was deliberate. It was surgical. In a chamber that had been vibrating with shouting and spectacle, her stillness cut deeper than any raised voice. For decades, politicians had been measured by how loudly they roared. But Jasmine had just rewritten the measure. Not volume, but precision. Not domination, but discipline. The lesson didn't just live in that room. It spilled into living rooms, classrooms, churches, and streets across the nation. She had shown something rare in politics, something people had forgotten was possible. Truth can carry itself. She didn't rush to explain or over-defend. She didn't wrap her evidence in flowery speeches. She placed the numbers on the table and trusted the world to see what they already knew, but had been afraid to admit. Numbers don't lie. That phrase rang out like a gunshot, then echoed like a hymn, and she let it echo without interruption, because she understood something elemental. When the truth is that clear, anything more would only weaken it. That restraint taught a brutal lesson to the powerful and a liberating one to the powerless. To the powerful, it was a mirror shoved in their face. All the spin, all the deflections, all the years of rehearsed dominance. None of it could survive a fact delivered without theatrics. They were left naked, scrambling, humiliated. To the powerless, it was a revelation. You don't need to scream to matter. You don't need to break yourself trying to be heard. Sometimes it only takes one steady sentence, grounded in truth, to tilt the balance of the room. What Jasmine modeled that night wasn't just political strategy. It was human survival strategy. She showed that dignity is a weapon, silence is a shield, and clarity is stronger than chaos. She didn't teach America how to yell better. She taught America how to stand taller. In a country fractured by noise, she reminded people that the loudest voice is not always the strongest. The one who keeps composure while everyone else loses control. That is the one people remember. That is the one history writes down. The lesson was clear. Power without discipline collapses. Discipline without power transforms. Trump had power, but no discipline. Jasmine had discipline, and that made her powerful. The contrast was brutal, and it exposed a truth people had long suspected but rarely saw so vividly. Leadership is not about dominating the stage. It's about owning your ground and refusing to surrender it, even when the room feels like it's crushing you. That's why historians called it her defining career moment. Because it wasn't just about her career, it was about reminding the country what leadership should look like. And what did leadership look like in that instant? It looked like restraint in the face of insult. It looked like stillness in the middle of a storm. It looked like a young black congresswoman refusing to let centuries of arrogance push her into the role of the angry voice they were so eager to paint her as. Instead, she let the arrogance collapse under its own weight, while she stayed calm, unshaken, and immovable. That image burned itself into the national memory, because it wasn't just politics, it was human truth laid bare. The human lesson here reached deeper than headlines or hashtags. For parents watching with their kids, it became a teachable moment. Fathers told their sons, "See that? That's strength. Not yelling, not fists. That." Mothers told their daughters, "See her? That's what it looks like when you refuse to bow to anyone." Teachers paused their civics classes and replayed the clip, not because of the numbers on the page, but because of the discipline on her face. Jasmine's silence became a curriculum in itself, a study in courage, patience, and purpose. And for people who had been told all their lives that silence equals weakness, she flipped the meaning. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was weaponized clarity. She reminded them that silence is not surrender when it comes after truth. It is the truth's final act. Like a courtroom after a verdict, the silence doesn't erase the words, it enshrines them. And Jasmine had just written her verdict into history. Numbers don't lie, and neither did her courage. The drama of that moment was amplified because it went against the grain of everything America had grown used to. Leaders shouting down critics, leaders drowning every mistake in noise, leaders mistaking rage for strength. And then came Jasmine, refusing to play their game. She didn't mirror his anger. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't rise to his bait. She simply let him unravel while she stood in the kind of silence that turns into thunder. The more he shouted, the weaker he looked. The more she stayed still, the stronger she became. The human lesson? Control outlasts chaos every time. That is why historians called it her defining career moment. Not because it was dramatic in the usual way, but because it was pure. It distilled the essence of leadership into a single act, the courage to let the truth speak for itself. And that purity is what makes moments last. Decades from now, people won't remember the exact numbers on the page. They won't remember the date of the hearing. They will remember the silence, the calm, the phrase, and the contrast. They will remember the moment when arrogance drowned itself and dignity stood tall. But the lesson didn't just belong to Washington, it belonged to ordinary people. Workers in factories said it felt like watching someone finally speak to their bosses without fear. Students in classrooms said it felt like permission to stand up for themselves without screaming. Pastors in churches said it felt like a sermon about truth and patience rolled into one. Jasmine's choice not to pile on gave her words a holiness, a weight that can't be faked. It told people everywhere, when you stand in truth, you don't have to prove it. Truth proves itself. The cinematic power of that moment wasn't in the noise, it was in the restraint. Imagine it like a fight scene in an action movie. One fighter flails, throwing punches wildly, burning energy. The other stands calm, waiting, watching, then lands one precise blow that ends it. Jasmine was the calm fighter. Trump was the one flailing. And America watched as the one with restraint walked away, while the one without it collapsed under his own fury. The metaphor was unmistakable, and the lesson impossible to ignore. And that's why people connected to it on a visceral level. It wasn't just politics, it was life. Everyone has been in that position, facing someone louder, richer, more arrogant. Everyone has felt the pressure to yell back, to match fury with fury. But Jasmine gave them an alternative. She showed them that you can win by refusing to lose yourself, that you can disarm a bully not with more shouting, but with a single unshakable truth and the courage to let it stand alone. That was the human lesson, and it resonated like gospel. The real beauty of her silence was what it demanded from others. By not saying more, she forced America to fill the silence themselves. And what did they fill it with? Respect, reflection, reverence. She created a vacuum and let the truth echo inside it. That echo traveled further than any speech could, because it belonged to the people now. It wasn't just Jasmine's truth, it became their truth. And that's why the lesson stuck. Because it wasn't delivered to them, it was discovered by them. So what does the human lesson boil down to? It's simple, but it's hard. Dignity is strength, and restraint is power. In a system where people are rewarded for being louder, angrier, and more relentless, Jasmine Crockett proved that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop talking. To let your evidence, your integrity, your truth do the work. To resist the temptation to fight on their terms. To remember that history does not remember who shouted the most. It remembers who stood the tallest when it mattered. And that is why historians, commentators, and ordinary Americans alike pointed to that hearing and said, this is it. This is her defining career moment. Not because of the folder alone, not because of the confrontation alone, but because she chose to let truth breathe when every instinct in Washington would have told her to suffocate it with words. She didn't suffocate it. She set it free. And in setting it free, she gave America a lesson that will outlive the noise. Numbers don't lie, and silence, when it follows truth, speaks louder than anything else. And when people replayed the moment again and again, they began to realize it wasn't just about politics, it was about something bigger. The meaningful message buried inside the clash was simple, sharp, and unforgettable. Truth does not need to scream to be heard. Jasmine Crockett had just proved that integrity has a strength all its own. She had shown that power built on lies may roar, but it will eventually collapse under the weight of reality. In that room, it wasn't the insults or the fury that defined the outcome. It was the stillness of one woman anchored in truth. And that stillness became a mirror, reflecting back everything America needed to see. The story told more than the downfall of one man's arrogance. It told the story of what people are capable of when they choose courage over noise. The cameras caught the contrast in real time. One leader unraveling, another rising with nothing but a document and a sentence. That image became symbolic of a deeper truth. The message was clear. You don't need privilege, wealth, or intimidation to stand tall. You need clarity, discipline, and the will to hold the line when the room shakes. And that's why her silence became thunderous. The lesson cut across party lines, race lines, and class lines. It didn't matter if you agreed with Jasmine's politics or not. What mattered was the principle. People whispered to themselves, if she could do that in the White House, maybe I can do it in my own life. That is the core of the message. Dignity can dismantle arrogance. Patience can overpower rage. And sometimes the most revolutionary act is to refuse to be dragged down to the level of those who thrive on chaos. Think about what Jasmine really told America without saying a word. She showed that accountability isn't optional. It's demanded by the truth itself. She showed that fear only has power if you feed it. She showed that leadership isn't about controlling a room, it's about controlling yourself. These weren't lessons wrapped in speeches. They were lessons embodied in one choice, a choice to let the facts carry the weight, while she stood as proof that restraint can roar louder than rage. The meaningful message didn't just live in the halls of the White House, it spilled out into coffee shops, schools, churches, and living rooms across the country. Teachers told students about courage, pastors told congregations about patience, parents told children about dignity. They all used Jasmine's story to remind people that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And the way you earn it is not by shouting others down, but by standing unflinching when they shout at you. The action film tension of that night turned into something far more lasting, a cultural reference point. People began using Jasmine's words, "Numbers don't lie," as shorthand for all kinds of truths in their lives. Workers used it in meetings when bosses tried to deny reality. Activists painted it on banners to demand accountability. College students wore it on t-shirts to remind themselves that honesty will always outlast spin. That's the real meaning of a story like this. Not that one person won, but that millions found a way to reclaim their own strength through it. The message also stripped away illusions. It forced America to ask itself, are we a country that rewards the loudest voice or the clearest truth? For too long, rage had been mistaken for power. But Jasmine's silence exposed that lie. Rage is fragile. Noise is desperate. Real power is measured by the ability to keep composure when the other side tries to drown you out. That is the leadership lesson, and it is a message meant for every generation watching. The story's message also reminded people that history doesn't belong to those who manipulate it. It belongs to those who stand firm when it's hardest. History doesn't record the cheap insults. It records the clarity of moments that pierce through confusion. Jasmine's moment was one of those. It reminded people that the arc of leadership bends not toward ego, but toward accountability. And that accountability often begins with one person refusing to be silenced. Most importantly, the message showed that courage isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. Jasmine didn't arrive at that room flawless. She wasn't free from doubt, but she was free from fear. She knew that if she gave the truth space, it would do what it always does: expose, convict, and endure. That is the message people carried away. That courage is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to let fear dictate your actions. What made the message so powerful was its universality. It wasn't just about Trump. It wasn't just about Jasmine. It was about every human being who has ever faced someone louder, richer, or seemingly untouchable. It was about every worker who has ever sat across from an unfair boss, every student who has ever been bullied, every citizen who has ever felt powerless. The story reminded them, the truth in your hands can be stronger than the power in theirs. That is the meaning, and it's why people replayed the moment again and again. The drama of that night faded into history, but the message survived because it was timeless. It whispered that human dignity will always outlast human arrogance. It shouted that restraint can cut deeper than rage. And it proved that in a world addicted to chaos, composure is not just rare, it is revolutionary. That's why historians, commentators, and ordinary people alike called it not just a political moment, but a human one, because it taught a lesson that outlives the news cycle. Truth delivered with courage will always win. That is the meaningful message of Jasmine's story. Not that one politician won a battle, not that one president lost face, but that truth is still powerful enough to shake walls, silence noise, and rewrite the narrative. It was a story of survival, a story of discipline, a story of courage so controlled that it became contagious. And that contagion spread beyond politics into daily lives, giving people a map for how to face their own battles with dignity. So when people tell the story years from now, they won't just say Jasmine Crockett embarrassed Donald Trump. They will say she reminded America of something it had nearly forgotten. They will say she reminded us that leadership is not measured by noise, but by clarity. That respect isn't earned through fear, but through dignity. That silence, when wielded with purpose, can roar louder than the loudest voice in the room. And that above all, numbers don't lie, and neither does courage. And if that was the message, then the next step was clear. It demanded action. The story of Jasmine Crockett isn't just something to admire from a distance. It's a challenge, a dare thrown into the laps of everyone who watched. What will you do when the truth is on the line? Will you sit silent and let noise bury it, or will you hold your ground and let clarity speak? This isn't just politics. It's about life, work, family, and every space where arrogance tries to bully dignity into silence. Action doesn't always mean marching in the streets or holding a megaphone. Sometimes action is refusing to let lies go unchecked in a meeting. Sometimes it's teaching your kids that respect is earned, not demanded. Sometimes it's reminding your community that leadership without accountability is hollow. And sometimes it's simply choosing not to echo rage, but to hold steady until the truth cuts through. So take Jasmine's lesson and make it your own. Stand where you are and say, numbers don't lie, facts don't bend, dignity doesn't break. Do not wait for someone else to do it. Do it in your workplace, your classroom, your family, your country. Because the truth is only as strong as those willing to stand with it. And history will not remember how loudly you shouted. It will remember whether you stood tall when it mattered most. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.